It's that time again, that time when we slide into the virtual booth at our favorite virtual bar and have a meeting of the first annual 3P Book Club, Oprah not included. I'm joined today by Greg and Ken, and I'm your host, Chris, and this is three pastors walk into a bar with a strange book club in it.
Yes. It's the library next door.
You bet. You bet. I mean, if you're in Athol, you almost can't help but it to be next door. So
Everything's next door.
everything's next door in Athol.
It makes it nice, though.
Indeed.
Come on. We got to love it.
Well, we don't have to.
Yeah, we do.
No, we don't.
Yeah.
Quit telling me what I have to do.
Okay. Then leave.
Tell me what I have
Back
to
to
do.
California.
Why do I have to leave? You're telling me what to do after I told you what to tell me not what to do.
It's our society today. Somebody will
yeah.
tell you what to do. If you don't like it, start a riot.
If you don't like what I'm telling you to do, then do something else that I tell you to do to not do what I'm telling you to do.
Okay.
That's the way it works out, doesn't it? So today, with all of the hullabaloo over public libraries, what hullabaloo are you talking about, Ken? Is there a hullabaloo over public libraries?
Most of our audience is going, what?
What?
What's that mean?
What's a hullabaloo? Isn't that guy from Jungle Book?
yeah.
No, that's Baloo.
Baloo. Just plain old
Yeah,
Baloo.
just Baloo.
No hulla.
Hulla must be his brother. So if you have Baloo with his brother, they're Hulla and Baloo. No?
The Blues Brothers?
No. Oh, Blues
that it?
Brothers. That's a classic.
Yeah. No, there's a lot going on about libraries. You know, we've talked about it a little bit on this podcast, how certain books have been promoted in public libraries and some in school libraries lately that parents have taken an exception to, and it kind of shines a lot of light on, well, what's good reading and what's not good reading, what's appropriate for different age groups, what's appropriate culturally, morally. And so got to thinking a little bit, all of us have done considerable reading in our lifetimes, and just got to thinking, well, all three of us have very different styles and tastes and personalities and everything, and so I thought it might be interesting to share with our readers what are our favorite books that have impacted us the most in our faith or in our life, had a big influence on the way we think and live, and maybe our readers would find some inspiration in that, some help to find good books to read.
How far back are we going?
You can go all
Can
the way
we go to
back
sixth
there.
grade?
Sure. Huck Finn.
Actually, it was a book called Up Periscope.
Up Periscope.
Yeah, it's about submarines. I really thought I wanted to be in submarines as a kid, and I actually got in one time. I don't want to be
Changed your
here.
mind?
Is that kind of like the genre you prefer? Is like realistic military type?
It was.
Genre?
It certainly was. In my younger years, Secret Service. I can tell you stories about like the New Jersey nickel mystery and counterfeits and stuff like that, and things that the Secret Service did back in the day. But I kind of lost that as I grew up. But there was one book that did impact me, and it was interesting because it was prior to my Christian walk, but it was right on the cusp. In fact, I may have been a Christian at that time. And it was called Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand.
It's a movie, right?
They
Or a
did make it
series.
into a series. I don't know if they ever finished it because we saw the first two.
That's one of those books that people either love it or they hate it.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. She's just an incredible writer, which always draws me into a good.
Some
fiction
critics
book.
would disagree with you.
Well, yeah. And- but some
a lot
would
of
agree.
The best
literary
writers are that
critics.
way.
Well, a lot of literary critics really feel like her writing was very subpar. Actually, it was really
Well,
interesting.
Yeah, and it may have been for people like me, not an intellectual. I like the grittiness of a book that basically tells it like it is from her perspective. I don't believe it's like that.
Yeah,
It's becoming more like that.
I'm not sure that it's really important what literary critics think. I just think it's interesting that that book in particular has drawn a lot of criticism among not even just scholars, among people as far as it's like the quality of its content. Like it is really one of those books, like you either love it or you hate it.
Yeah.
You know,
and I loved it. I mean, I could not put it down. I probably read it in a week and a half, maybe. And it's big.
I got through about a chapter and a half. Yeah, I
couldn't do it. Huh?
I couldn't do it. Yeah, it wasn't that. To me, one of the things that really turns me off to reading is when people are too detailed. That's one of the reasons I couldn't read Harry Potter, because don't say that. Right? Kim and I read the first two together, and then we started reading the third one, and it was just annoying to me. Like, she wouldn't leave anything up to the imagination. It was like she would describe everything down to like the freaking thread count of the rugs. You know, it just was can you let me imagine what that chair looks like, please? That would be great.
Where's the story again?
It was really upsetting. So
I've read a few like that where it's just over the top adjectives and it just it's not any fun.
No, yeah.
You know, you're just reading. It's almost like you don't use your imagination.
You gotta keep that in front of you. People can only hear like every third word you're saying.
Well,
there you go.
Could happen.
I thought you would know how to do that by now.
I'm the one that always does that. I was looking at you. I probably needed to.
You gotta move your head around if you're gonna do that.
Well, just do the sideways glance. How's that? Does that work? Have a headache by the end of this podcast.
Yeah, that was a good one. That was an interesting one. Fun fact: I hate reading. I don't like to read at all.
Not even on your computer? Are you talking just books, opening up a book?
Nah, never been a big fan. I have read some fiction in the past. If I read fiction, it's typically fantasy or sci-fi genre.
You're talking fiction. You don't like reading fiction.
I mean, I don't mind reading fiction. I just don't find it relaxing to read. Just sit down and read a book.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's probably counterintuitive to a lot of people, but I think you have to understand also just the sheer volume of words that I read on a regular basis.
Yep.
If I go home, you know, after reading commentaries and lexicons and dictionaries and then the Bible all day long, the last thing I want to do is go home and read a good book.
Yeah.
You know, so that's never been a thing for me.
I'm there. I haven't read a fiction book. I'm trying to think of the last one I read. And I don't have a clue. Yeah. Because there's so much in our position of data that we need to take in that even the thought of doing something like that is like, nope, can't do it. Maybe I'd like to, but
yeah, there's books that I would like to read, but unfortunately there's books that I have to read.
Yeah.
So that there's just always a stack of books that I have to read. And so I never get to the end of that stack.
Yeah.
And it just constantly recycling. And then you get boneheads like Ken bringing in books, you know, and he's like, here, read this. This will be good information for you. And I'm just thinking to myself, you son of a gun. How dare you? You know,
he's just trying to help you out.
Oh, yeah. Man. You bet.
Read it at your next vacation.
Yeah.
Yeah. While I'm out sitting on a hammock, I'm going to read whatever that
bored.
was.
It's good. Yeah. Good time waster.
Yeah, with all the counseling that we're doing, a lot of mine is counseling books. So it's like, I want to read about somebody that's not a psychopath, you know?
Yeah. No kidding.
Oh, wait, they're all psychopaths out there.
Yeah. I have been reading a lot of philosophy here lately. That's been enlightening.
But Plato, Socrates?
Dostoevsky,
okay.
You know, folks of that vein.
Yeah.
I've been reading a lot of that and trying to really tap into different world philosophies and the way that people look at the world, and trying to quantify where those classes fit and how they interlace together, and how because those things actually play into just about everything that we do in our world today: politics, economics, religion, sociology. You know, all of those things are they kind of intermingle in there. So. I've been reading a lot of those types of books here lately. One book that I had that I've just started reading that I've been meaning to read for a long time, but I just started it is 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson, which has been a really good book. Some interesting concepts in that book. Some people think that it is. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. But in reality, not really. But there's some interesting concepts in there. He's got some interesting ways of looking at how Christianity ties in with a lot of philosophy. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
Even though I don't think he would declare himself to be a Christian, you can tell that he does have some kind of faith. I'm not sure what that is, but it's there.
Heard him in an interview. Somebody say to him, I can't remember who it was. It says, "Jordan, you better be careful. You're getting real close to being a Christian." And he just smiled.
Yeah, I think he's probably closer than people think.
Yeah.
But in any case, so I've been reading a lot of that. I haven't read a full fiction book in probably 3 years. I always grab one thinking, oh, this will be fun to read this. And then I get like part of the way through it and I'm just like, I don't have time or the energy for this.
Yeah. It's got to grab you in the first
It has to grab me within the first chapter. It's just, I can tell you the first fiction book that I ever read as a child all the way through, though. It was a Forgotten Realms book. It was called Silver Streams, and it was the first book that I ever read that had the character Drist Do'Urden in it, who is a drow elf. And once I read that book, I wanted to know more. And so I read the entire series. And then R.A. Salvatore put out a whole series just about him. And then there was more that came out about him. So I collectively, of all of R.A. Salvatore's books, I have read everything.
Wow.
Which is probably, gosh, I don't know, 20 books, 20 at this point. But I haven't picked up another one since then. Well, no, that's not true. I have read some Warhammer books all the way through. And those are an endeavor.
How would you say that's informed your worldview, all those books?
Not a lot. Not a lot. No, not really. I imagine there are some people that it does, but I read those for what they are. They're just stories, like somebody sitting around a campfire telling a story. I don't really put too much stock into the philosophy of it. Although, I might see some things in it where they may inadvertently be pointing to some type of worldview or something like that, but that's typically not what they're going for in those books. They're action adventure, they're high adventure books, fantasy books, in the vein of R.A. Tolkien. And so, that's kind of the vein that I've got. Now I have read Tolkien's work too.
Yeah,
I find it really interesting that we as humans are so creative with story.
Yeah,
that we so relate to and move towards story, yearn for story, appreciate story. And then we can also be so creative, created in the image of God. We can create story of things that do not exist.
Yeah. Yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
It's a miraculous gift.
It is.
It's definitely a gift that comes from how we are related to the image of God, for sure. That creative spark.
Over all the ages, all the tribes, all the nations, story is maybe one of the most powerful things.
Well, I mean, look at
Humanity.
the creativity of the nonfiction story that God wrote. You know,
and therein lies a lot of our struggles today. Is that a lot of people think it is fiction?
Well, that's going to always be the case.
It's always. I just think it's increasing.
You think so?
I do. Yeah. Just mainly because, every now and then you get, a statistic comes across your computer about how many people are going to church, how many people are reading their Bible, and you look at that and you go, yep. I mean, I grew up in the 50s and didn't have locked doors, trusted everybody. You could walk into the neighbor's house, say hi, not get shot.
Well, I can do that now.
Yeah. Well, your neighbor. Which neighbor?
I can do that with any of my neighbors.
Really?
Yeah.
I can't.
His mom, his son.
That's where I'm leaning.
No, if I went over, I mean, I would knock, of course. I'm just
Yeah.
going to walk into somebody's house. That would be stupid. That would be bad even
That'd
in the
be creepy.
50s. But
No, that's it. It wasn't.
nobody
I
just
remember
walked over their neighbor's house and just walked right in their house.
Where I lived, yeah, you did.
That'd be great if you were in your kitchen naked
Well, that
in your
happens.
underwear. It's like, hey, everybody, I'm
Yeah.
over hanging out with
Hey.
you. Can I have a drink, you know?
As an 8-year-old, there was nothing wrong with
Well,
that.
that's a habit that I'm glad went away because that would be obnoxious. Yeah, that would be terrible. But yeah, I mean, I don't lock my doors at night.
You should.
I mean, I do, but I don't have to.
I found out if you leave your home and you do not lock your door and somebody breaks in, your insurance isn't going to cover what the damages or the loss. And I was like,
Interesting.
what? Yeah, because out where I live, I'm going to have to replace a door or a window and everything they stole because it's pretty easy.
I think it
Probably
probably.
putting that out on the airways. Yeah, just come to my house and break in.
I think it probably depended. Just like then, I think it depended on where you lived at. Because I think you would be hard pressed to find somebody that lived in an apartment in New York City in the 50s that did not lock their doors. I just find that hard to believe.
It's a different realm. Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I think it
that
depends.
might be. Put it out there. If you lived in New York City in the 50s, did you lock your door in an apartment?
There's a lot of them here. There's a lot of them in our area.
Yeah, we're
We had
inundated
6
with-
locks on our door. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I always hear people talk about the 50s and the early 60s as being the golden era of the world. But I mean, it couldn't have been all. It could have been all rainbows and daisies. I mean,
No.
you have your issues. I mean, obviously, there were things that were even publicly weird at that time. You know, man, I think about just even watching I Love Lucy and hearing Desi talk about giving his wife an allowance,
Mhm.
and then if she didn't maintain her allowance, he would give her a spanking.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like, yeah, I mean, I think it's probably a pretty good thing that we've moved away from the world where we looked at our wives as if they were children. That's probably a good thing.
Yeah, and that's a 30,000-foot view, I think, as well. You know, like I said, I lived it. My family, my siblings, my parents, and I remember my dad came home drunk one night. Well, let's put it this: inebriated. He had driven. We lived in the mountains above Santa Barbara. It was a 13-mile trip home, and when he walked through the door, my mom realized he had been drinking. She was pretty upset, and so were my 3 sisters, and they all beat him. Which I thought was, Dad, get out of there
Wow.
before it's too late.
Feminism
You know,
101.
yeah, hit him with slippers and stuff like
Yeah.
that, because they were terrified, that he had done that. But, there was not a lot of trauma in my life growing up, and if there was, it was usually something that today wouldn't even be, take a second glance at. Divorce wasn't even heard. Well, when you heard about divorce, it was a major thing, and the whole neighborhood knew about it. Pregnancy, stuff like that, out of wedlock. I just don't remember it. Maybe I was in a time of, I didn't care, didn't observe it. But then you got into the 60s when I was a teenager, and
It's
all
a
there.
whole different story back
whole
then. wasn't
different
it?
story.
I don't know. I
You've
think
always been kind of a history buff.
Me?
Yeah, haven't you? You and Adriana. right?
Adriana has.
Yeah. As far as
Yeah.
there's a girl, find her reading a fiction book is pretty rare,
Mm.
because everything she reads is historical and biographical, and so she knows. I mean, I just ask her about what was it, The Fire of 1910 here. She's got stories. She's read several books. The Big Burn, I mean, it's just every time she sees one like that, she snatches it up, takes it home, reads it, and she reads literally 10 times as much as I do when it comes to books.
Is Kim an avid reader?
She reads more than I do. Her problem is that she can't read for a very long time before she just falls asleep. So
my hands up.
Yeah. So she'll lay down in bed and she'll start reading a book or something, and then 15 minutes goes by and she's like putting it down, going to bed. Yeah.
I go to bed early to read a book.
Yeah.
And now I'm up at 3 a.m. because I've already had my 7 hours of sleep.
Yeah, I mean, I tried to read. I've read in bed before. I read a lot of books in bed before I started having to need readers, and then when you start needing readers to read, then you got to have better light, and then it just becomes a fiasco. And it's not worth it to me.
Yeah.
The juice isn't worth the squeeze to me. Yeah. So. I just don't bother.
The bed really isn't the issue there, because if I'm laying on the couch, sitting in a chair, sitting at the dining room table, it doesn't matter where I am. It's hard for me to go more than a half an hour.
Yeah.
Reading. How about you? How about Patty?
It's interesting. As a child, she didn't read a whole lot and wasn't a good reader. And then we started homeschooling our children, and she started really pressing our kids to learn to read.
Homeschooling will do that to you.
It does. And so she actually kind of caught her love of reading later in life, getting our kids started into reading, and our daughter's a voracious reader, and Patty is a voracious reader. We had to do something with her Kindle account the other day, and oh my goodness,
panic set in.
She has. Trying to remember what the number was. I think it was probably about 150 books on Kindle.
Oh, wow.
She reads every single night to go to sleep. And sometimes she has trouble going to sleep, so she'll read from 10 till 3 in the morning.
That's Adriana.
She'll blow through a book a day or every 2 days.
Yeah,
she loves historical fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And, man, she has read a lot.
Yeah. What about Ken?
I'm kind of like Chris. I haven't read much fiction in a long time. I used to grab books when I was traveling for work a lot. So I'd read a book basically every trip. I'd read half of it on the way to wherever I was going, and then I'd read a few chapters while I was there at work, and then read the rest of it on the way home. And by the time I got home, I'd finish the book. And so I used to read a bunch of books that way. But most of my reading has been nonfiction for the most part. There have been a few good fiction books that have kind of had an impact on my faith and the way I think about the world. And
which ones are those?
Well, actually, I brought a couple. You guys brought your examples, right?
Funny you should.
Oh, you bet. I have them right here on Google.
Yeah, these derelicts. They didn't do their homework.
I don't keep books either.
Yeah.
I used to. In fact, I still have 3 boxes in the attic of the church books that I've removed off my shelves because it used to be really cool for a pastor to have a wall full of books, big library, and all that. And it just sits there and collects dust. It takes up room. You never use them. It's even now, I have a bunch of Bible commentaries and dictionaries and all that kind of stuff all kind of packed away. But goodness, with the invention of eSword, I mean, why would you do that? I mean, if we had no power and, I had to go back to the Stone Ages to do research, I would. But man, computers have made it so much nicer.
Yeah.
I don't have to have stuff laying all over the place, and it's just amazing. But I don't keep books. So any of the books that I've read back in the past, I wouldn't have them on hand anyways.
Yeah, I went looking for some of the ones that I was thinking of for this podcast, and I was going looking for them, and it's I probably gave that one away. I probably gave that one away, and I probably gave that one away. And then what I didn't give away, most of those, when we moved over here, downsized and purged, we took carloads of boxes of books to Goodwill and stuff because we had to downsize. But I found a few that I still had copies of. And this is an interesting book. I don't know if any of our listeners recognize the name Anne Rice.
Mm-hmm.
Anne Rice was a
Interview,
notable
Interview with a Vampire.
Yep.
Mhm.
International best-selling author. She wrote the Vampire Diaries before she got saved, and then after she got saved, she started basically investigating the faith and the historicity of the Bible and everything, and she wrote a couple of books. The first one was Christ the Lord Out of Egypt, which was Jesus's childhood years, and then this one I had on hand, The Road to Cana, which was kind of his young adult years. And it is fiction. She makes no bones about that. It is fiction. But what she did is she did all of her research as a good author could on all the factual stuff that she could find, and then she kind of filled in the gaps a little bit and tried to put a face and a humanity on Jesus in this. What was it like to be him, and what was his world like, and the people around him? And so for what it did for me, it didn't really, there aren't any real revelations in there, because all of the stories that are in there of the actions and the words of Christ are in the Bible, but she did add in some stuff. But what it did for me was kind of help to bring more into focus Jesus' humanity, because that's kind of what her stories focus on, is not so much the theology. The theology is there, but it's the humanity of what it was like. And so it really helped to expand my imagination of what Jesus' humanity was like, what he struggled with as a man, and with his family and his friends and the disciples and the people around him. And so I thought I'd read a little bit out of here that kind of gives you a little bit of a taste of what her books are like. And okay, where am I at? Okay, so this is part of the scene of when Jesus is in the desert for the 40 days, 40 nights, right? And so we have very little information in the Bible about what that was like, and so this is part of what she wrote about that, imagining that. In the night I awoke. Was this my own voice reciting what was written? And every secret thing shall be opened, and every dark place illuminated? And then this is him praying in his mind. Dear God, no, do not let them know this. Do not let them know the great accumulation of all this agony and joy, this misery, this solace, this reaching, this gouging pain, but they will know. Each and every one of them will know. They will know because what you are remembering is what has happened to each and every one of them. Did you think this was more or less for you? Did you think? And when they are called to account, when they stand naked before God and every incident and every utterance is laid bare, you will know all of it with each and every one of them. I knelt in the sand. Is this possible, Lord, to be with each of them when he or she comes to know? To be there for every single cry of anguish? For the grief-stricken remembrance of every incomplete joy? O Lord God, what is judgment? And how can it be if I cannot bear to be with all of them for every ugly word, every harsh and desperate cry, for every gesture examined, for every deed explored to its roots? And I saw the deeds of my own life, the smallest, most trivial things. I saw them suddenly in their seed and sprout, and with their groping branches I saw them growing, intertwining with other deeds, and those deeds come to a form, a thicket and a woodland and a great roving wilderness that dwarfed the world as we hold it on a map, the world as we hold it in our minds. Dear God, next to this endless spawning of deed from deed and word from word and thought from thought, the world is nothing. Every single soul is a world. And I started to cry. So here he's contemplating what it would be like to be with every human being at the judgment, and everything they went through and everything they're called into judgment for, and his compassion for each one of us because of his love and what he sacrificed for us. So it's kind of a taste of that one.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I wasn't aware that Anne Rice had converted and then started writing Christian fiction.
Yeah, and the Christian world just excoriated her. They just did not accept where she was coming from. Everyone was suspicious and thought she was, faking it all, just try to sell books. They condemned her and judged her. She tried to, kind of push back with public statements. But yeah, they never gave her an inch. And within, I don't know how many years, but within some number of years, she basically swore off her faith. She said, just can't do it. This is God's people. And it just wrecked her faith, the way people treated her. It was horrible.
When was this? When was this?
I'd have to look it up.
Is she alive
It was
today?
probably in the 90s. As far as I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was, she had a really hard time of it.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, Christians are really good at that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of like your sermon yesterday.
And
The
Christians
judgment just fell on her.
Yeah, we excel at casting judgment upon people. Yeah, it's one thing that we have seen over and over again.
Christians are one of the few groups that shoot their wounded.
That's something that is interesting. A thought that I had while you were going through that was, I'm a visual learner. I don't learn very well from reading typically. If I do, I have to kind of take it really slow and absorb it because I tend to overthink things a little bit. So if I have something laid out for me visually, I learn better. And with a visual learner, one of the things that has really benefited me has been the era of video. And, I hear people say a lot, it's like, well, man, video is terrible because it killed books and, people don't read paper books anymore. And it's like, okay, well, fair enough. But, what happened with people like myself that were not geared to be learners from literature? Like we're not designed for that. It's just not something we were capable of doing. Were we kind of doomed to just be tradesmen and, things that we could learn from people that we could watch do things? So basically we were not able to rise to the level of quote unquote intellectuals. Is that, what we were kind of like, doomed to do, so to speak. And now with the invention of the internet, it seems like the rise of intellectualism is way greater than it used to be because,
Pendulum has swung the other direction.
Yeah. And is that a bad thing or is that just a evolution of how we learn? And is it bad that books have kind of become the kind of, they're not really secondary, but they're just like another means by which you can learn. They're not the way which you learn. It's become another means by which you learn. Is that necessarily a bad thing?
A book is so, you're reading the words. That's the visual. With videos, there's so much more going on that you have to pay attention to. And I don't think, for me, I don't have the time when watching a video to contemplate a lot of what I'm, taking in. With a book, you stop. And, you can stop a video. But with that said, as you were talking, I was thinking of all the books that I've seen on the big screen and that I haven't read. And then, everybody that you talk to that has read a book, they see the movie and they go, oh, the book's much better.
Oh, the book's way better. Yeah, I hear that too.
Because it's deeper. I said, you can spend more time.
The book's only better if you read it.
Bingo.
Yeah. And so, but if you're a person like I am who lacks the time and the desire to actually read that book, it's like, I don't want to go back and read Tom Clancy's novels. I'd just rather watch the shows, like I don't need to watch Jack Ryan or I don't need to read Jack Ryan because I can watch it.
And I think, one of the best examples of that for me is Pilgrim's Progress.
Yeah.
I've read it. I've actually read it twice, but I've seen every movie ever made about it. And so I know the story fairly well because it's it's a classic. In fact, this is weird. We picked it up on, I don't know, Netflix or something a couple years ago. And Pilgrim was Liam Neeson. And he was like 18 years old. And we kept watching this. It was really bad, very poor quality. And I finally went, I think that's Liam Neeson, which made me go, thinking about the movies he's made recently. Was he a Christian? Is he a Christian? Never looked it up.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm with you. If you can get the basics of a book out of a video, a movie, an interview, go for it.
But see, I'm way different than you are. I process things differently than you, obviously, because if I'm watching a video, then I can process that differently. I can think deeply about everything that's being said and still pay attention to what's being said.
Yeah.
With a book, I find that my thoughts are so scattered in the way that I'm interpreting the book that I get irritated very easily, because it's like I'm trying to read a book and then I'm thinking, about what's going to be happening at this, or, I got too many things, and there's nothing really to focus on. So I can't really pay attention to that. And there might be a diagnosis for that. I don't know, but
yeah, that's why you like that mystery room, or what was that thing we did? The
escape room.
Yeah. And you were into that.
Yeah, I can handle stuff like that because there's a visual, tactile component to it.
Yeah.
But to just sit and read a book, like even a lecture, I could sit through a lecture. I could learn more from the person lecturing to me than if I were to grab the book and read the book myself. Because I can't concentrate on just the material. If I was to do that, I would have to read that book three or four times.
What does your Bible reading look like? I mean, obviously, any of us, when we read our Bible, we have in the back of our minds hundreds of other stories that we've read in the Bible, and we try to glue them all together as we read.
Well, I have to. That's probably one of the reasons why my sermon outline process is so intricate and detailed, because I have to have a lot of different things going on. So I'm not just reading my Bible. I'm reading 3 commentaries, 3 lexicons, 4 articles. I've got, a myriad of different things that I'm taking in all at once. Videos or lectures on what's, been said about these things. And then, always, just all the things that I've taken in so far have always kind of calculate into that. So it's not like I'm just reading a book of fiction. I've got like 5 things going on, and it's short form too. So it's like I'm focusing on one piece of scripture.
Right.
So it's like, I got this piece here, and then I got this piece here, and then I got this piece here, and then I got this piece here. It's not like I've got to go 12 pages into this one thing. That's one of the reasons I don't read Matthew Henry's commentary. Yes. Matthew Henry's commentary is very annoying to me because he doesn't space it out in such a way that I can quickly assess information. If I want to look at Matthew 7, for instance, and I want to read what verses 5 through 8 have to say, or what he had to say about verses 5 through 8.
Matthew's not the place
good luck.
to go.
You're going to have to read 3 pages to get to that, and you can't scan it because he doesn't topic it out.
Yeah.
I much prefer, even though John Gill is a Calvinist, I much prefer John Gill's commentary for the way he set it out, as opposed to Matthew Henry, even though Matthew Henry is probably the more consummate, Baptist. But I know enough that I can parse those things out, so it doesn't concern me. But I much rather have things that are segmented out in such a way that I can have them in my mind, at least, kind of on a thing. I always thought that, have you ever seen Minority Report? I would love to have something like that where I could just like you know, in the air, just flicking my hand, you know, go to the next page, you know, or, you know, go up or expand this, you know, I mean,
Iron Man has that too.
yeah, that would be pretty sweet.
So your process is not linear at all.
No.
It's very fractal.
No way, very fractal. Which is why, you know, when I'm piecing things together, like we've talked about before, you know, I'll have, you know, 3 anchor points, you know, and then I have this web that kind of moves into the middle. And then there's this kind of centralized point. And then from those fractaled points, I can take that web to the centralized point any way that I feel like I can get there. And it takes a lot more work probably to do it that way, but the results I find are better when I do it that way.
I had a thought as you were talking about the Matthew Henry commentary. It would be nice to have a commentary on the Matthew Henry commentary that was a little more concise.
You know, it's interesting because Matthew Henry is not like he's not super deep and philosophical in the way that he approaches stuff. He really is more, in my opinion, he's more of like the common man commentary, because he kind of tries to bring it down to the tradesman's level, you know, the journeyman level of discussion. John Gill, Clark, a lot of these guys, when they do their commentaries, they do a lot of cross-referencing to ancient Hebrew texts and Latin texts, and you know and they pull all this stuff together, and sometimes they make these kind of lofty philosophical ideas that you got to stop and you got to go, wait a minute, you know, and you have to think about that for a few minutes before you can move on, you know. So Matthew Henry is a little bit more easy to digest probably, but it's just the sheer volume of text. It just goes. Just
You need to go to sleep at night.
Yeah, when I have to read 3 pages to find
the one
thing that I want,
that's frustrating.
yeah, it's just no, I'm not into that. So you know, if someone's out there and they've made a searchable Matthew Henry's commentary, that would be great. But I haven't seen one.
What's your favorite commentary, Greg?
Well, I have the Matthew
your
Henry.
go-to?
My go-to is Matthew Henry.
He does have a concise, by the way. He has
he
Matthew
does.
Henry concise.
Okay,
that you can get.
that.
You can get that on eSword too.
But when I'm working with a few of the guys that I mentor, you know, Moody Bible, it's got a very concise commentary. John MacArthur in his ESV version of the Bible's got a pretty good commentary. I appreciate, you know, his thought process. So those are the 3 that I go to, and it's usually, you know, we'll hit. I don't know why this is, and it's very frustrating. We'll pick a word, and we'll be reading and go, I wonder what do they mean by that word? And so you focus on that word. And I would say 9 times out of 10, that word is not even included in any of the commentaries.
Mm-hmm.
It's like they've skipped
so
over.
frustrating.
And it's like, well, wait a minute. You know, at least give me the Greek meaning of it or something.
Yeah.
Well, that's what you have lexicons for.
Yeah. And we go there once in a while.
Yeah.
But it would be nice to just say, yeah, this means this, and in this context, in Matthew, blah, blah, blah.
Well, it makes you stop and wonder, am I the first person to ask this question?
Yes.
The answer to that question is no.
Minds that are leading our, you know, our faith in our generation, they have not considered this. What am I?
For anybody out there that's thinking that, let me just clue you in on something. The moment that you think you have a novel idea, it's not novel anymore.
Yes.
Nothing new under the sun.
Yeah, there is nothing new under the sun. Anything that you can think of as far as humanity is concerned in Scripture has probably already been thought of as a philosophy. I've been there before. I've found things and I thought, man, that is really cool. I don't think I've ever seen that before. And I get excited because I think that I've discovered some kind of new mystery, you know.
Type it into Google.
And then you're talking to somebody, they're like, oh, yeah, that reminds me of somebody else's work. And you're like, oh.
Got it.
Well, I'm not as clever as I thought.
Yeah.
It's humbling.
It is.
Yeah, but we could all use a little humbling every once in a while. Yeah. As far as lexicons are concerned, I know a lot of people aren't excited about dictionaries and lexicons, but I love a good lexicon and a good dictionary. And when I'm doing my research, there's a couple of different ones that I like to use. Of course, Strong's is a good one because it's numbered and you can pull up the numbers easily and everything. But my favorite by far is Thayer's. Thayer has the best Greek lexicon available, in my opinion. He has much better definitions, and he parses the definitions out in a way that is more easily understood by people. Strong's had kind of a way of minimizing the definitions, and then keeping them more like literally what the Greek word could mean without kind of separating out why they would mean that. Whereas Thayer kind of separates it out more like a dictionary would do. He gives you like one meaning and then sub meanings beyond that, and then another meaning and then sub meanings beyond that, so that it's separated out in such a way that's a little bit easier to understand, and that you can contextualize it a little bit easier. So yeah, I get pretty excited when talking about dictionaries and lexicons. I think those are pretty exciting. Yeah.
There you have it, ladies and
We're
gentlemen.
nerding out here now.
Yeah.
So, do you read the dictionary at night?
I like a dictionary. I like the Cambridge Dictionary. The unabridged Webster's is good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We used to play a game called Fictionary, and you would grab a dictionary, and whoever was it would go through the dictionary and find a word that nobody knew the meaning of, and then everybody would write a meaning for that word, and then the person that was it, of course, they wrote the actual meaning, and then you'd,
Who's closest?
fold them up and then spread them out, and everybody would read. And I thought, this is great. Kids are learning stuff and everything. And then, no, we learned the wrong meanings because they were more fun.
Confused everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. You want to learn words that you didn't know before? Just play online Scrabble with someone.
Oh my gosh.
So ridiculous. They'll put a word in and you're like, that is not a word. It's like two letters and it's like an X and an R. And you're like, that's not even a word. That's just two consonants. And then
Use it in a sentence.
But it gets in there, and what they do is they just kind of put the letters in until it accepts it.
Accepts it, yeah.
And then you're like, oh, okay, well, there you go. I just made 1,000 million points,
I had a guy that kicked my tail online all the time. I don't think I ever beat him. And one day I just texted him. I said, are you cheating? And he, no, LOL. And I says, well, how come you know all these words and blah, blah, blah. And he texts back. He says, I'm a college English professor. And I went, well, I'm not going to play with you anymore.
Yeah, you're just using me to build your ego.
Yes.
You're out of my league. That's what they need. Scrabble leagues.
Yeah.
Handicaps.
Yeah, so I mean that's kind of the books that I kind of deal with on a regular basis. And
So do you have a favorite nonfiction book? Besides the Bible. That's the given for all of us. That's the go-to. If you had to be stranded on an island, desert island with only one book,
that's an easy question. If I had to be stranded on a desert island with any one book, I would use the Navy SEALs survival guide.
There's
Good
your
choice.
nonfiction.
Yep. 100% of the time.
Good choice.
So that's a given. But I mean, nonfiction books that have really stuck in my mind as like, oh, this is the most important work of nonfiction that I have ever read. I couldn't even tell you. I mean, I must have read in the area of at least 500 nonfiction books. I don't even know where I would begin to place them at. I can tell you some of the ones that I really enjoyed. When I was doing some of my training, I read a book about manners and customs of the Bible.
I have that.
was a tremendous read.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good resource, too.
Boy, I'm telling you,
Yeah.
that was really fascinating to learn simple things like, what new wine is, or, how they created it. What is a bloated goat skin? What does it mean to gird up your loins? These terms that you see in the Bible, but you never really fully understand what they're meaning because they're cultural references, which most of the Gospels are basically a mandate on cultural significance. Christ spoke to a cultural people.
The parables.
And so, understanding that, understanding what a wedding looks like,
That one was really interesting in how in depth into not just the culture, but the religious background of a wedding.
What's hilarious to me is that we take the Bible and we try to create marriage counseling and marriage identity out of the Bible, but we do marriage nothing like the Bible says. It's like trying to put a square peg in a round hole. It just doesn't fit. Our current concept of marriage in the United States is so far removed from the concept of biblical marriage that it's no wonder why marriages are failing. It's not a comparison.
Instead of
it's
having
apples and oranges.
A 1-year betrothal period, most or many marriages start and end in a year.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. If you could get a couple to stay engaged for longer than 3 months, you've accomplished something. Because most couples, man, they're just like, whoo, let's get engaged. We fall in love with each other. Let's get married as quick as possible. Can we find a pastor that'll do our service? And if he requires counseling, is it only going to be a week? It really is like, let's rush into this and get this done.
Otherwise, we're going to Vegas.
Yeah.
Or Idaho.
So that to me is funny. And just one of the cultural things that is so odd that we don't fully grasp, or the fact that, we eat wheat bread for like Passover, and we think to ourselves, wow, that's really, but you know what it would have cost a Jewish person to have any kind of white bread, like wheat? It would have been ridiculously expensive. It would have been barley. Mostly they would have eaten barley.
Yeah.
You'd have been blessed.
Barley.
You'd have been blessed to have wheat. So it's just interesting things that you don't even think about. The fact that, when they talk about the guy who it's like better to sleep in the corner of your roof than to live with a contentious woman. People get this idea in America of like living up on your roof on the shingles, but that's not culturally. Just about every Jewish person had a patio on their roof where they would go and stay when it got hot. And it was covered and had the breeze going through there. And so it was like, it wasn't a terrible thing to go up there and live on your roof, especially if you had a contentious woman. That would have been much preferred.
Much preferred. Yeah, exactly.
So that was a nonfiction book that probably impacted me pretty deeply.
Yeah. I've never read it, but I use it often when I'm looking up stuff.
I read mine pretty much all the way through.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a big book.
Yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I couldn't put it down. But see, that's I would just rather read something like that than, and because it benefits my job that I do too.
So Ken, what's the last nonfiction book you read?
Oh, the last nonfiction book? That's a good question,
Chris.
It probably didn't have anything to do with Christianity. It was probably something I was just doing research on some other completely unrelated topic. And just
when I was in the high-tech industry, I'll never forget, we went to a trade show, Atlanta, I think it was, and a bunch of us got together and we were going to, go out and have dinner and have a good time that evening in Atlanta. And the guy that I was rooming with, it was like, hey, you want to go out with us tonight? And he goes, no, I'm going to stay in and do some reading. And I said, oh, what you reading? And he holds up a C++ book.
There's some captivating reading.
Was like,
let's read about programming.
Dude.
How exciting.
Really? I mean, we can get
learn
tacos
to code.
If you want,
I do remember the last book that I read all the way through, a fiction book that I read all the way through. It was 1984.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
that's interesting. I just opened up my Kindle library. This is actually a fiction book that I read. Last book that I read is Brave New World.
That I'd read that one before.
I've never read it
1984.
before, and I thought, I've heard people reading this forever. I need to sit down and read it.
You
So I
definitely
read it.
can't recommend it to anyone.
No.
No.
Like
No.
Lord of the Flies.
That is that book is
That thing
is
is-
filled with a lot of
yuck.
that's
He was an oddity in his day.
yes
and
he was.
still is.
Yes he was. Yes he was. Strange man. But you know, pretty right on with how things are headed.
Yeah, and very, very creative as a writer.
Ahead of his
Very
time.
stylistic.
Ahead of his time.
Mhm.
For sure. That's the hard part with fiction books to me. There's a lot of them that I think I would enjoy reading, but then when you come right down to time to read them, you can't read them because they're just basically porn. Game of Thrones is one. I wouldn't have watched the show because the show, after just watching 2 episodes, I couldn't watch it. It was just basically full frontal porn.
Yeah, me too.
You know-
You'd heard people, oh, what's happening on GOT? Blah blah blah. All this buzz going on about that.
Oh, it's-
Okay, well, I need to find out what this is all
Yeah.
about.
Well, I tried.
First episode, I'm like, what the
What
heck?
in the world is going on here? This is just basically you need to subscribe to this because this is porn.
Is it a cartoon?
No,
New-
Game of Thrones is
Really?
a show. It was on
Oh, it is?
HBO.
Live
Yeah, but it was a
action.
book first,
Right.
And-
I've heard of the game.
and so it's not a game.
it's not a game.
No, it's a
Game of
show.
Thrones isn't it?
No, Game of Thrones is a show. It's not a game.
Okay.
But it was a book first, and I asked. Actually, it's interesting because I asked your daughter,
Mandy?
Mandy. What is this something that is it as bad as the show in the book? And she was like, "Oh yeah,
It's probably worse.
Oh,
yeah." And so I was like, "Okay, well, that's out.
That's out.
Yeah, I can't read that."
Wow.
Even some of Tom Clancy's stuff is profane. It's not sexually explicit, but there's a lot of profanity in it.
Yeah.
Which is, I don't actually, that doesn't bother me as much because, I mean, I've been around law enforcement and military enough to know that that's the way that they communicate. That, I mean, if you're in a room filled with people in the military and you're not hearing the F-bomb every 4th word, then
They're not real
there's
military
something there's
people.
something wrong. I mean, that's just the way that they talk, unfortunately. And you could either be offended by it and move on, or you can just let it go and not worry about it. Law enforcement's the same way.
Real quick, I want to take off on a tangent here. Do you think, because the Bible says, don't use coarse language. I interpret that as, my research says that's, profanity. And I've met people
I would disagree with that.
that, okay, good. We'll talk off air.
Next episode.
Next episode. What is profanity?
Well, coarse language is not necessarily profanity.
Okay.
Just
But-
like corrupt
but
communication is not necessarily
Is it one of
profanity.
them? One of the coarse things?
I mean, possibly if that's the way that you define it, but what's hard about talking about profanity is that there's not really a scriptural equivalent to what we view as profanity today. And if that's the case, and you're taking it as a general principle, then a good majority of the words that we speak on a regular basis would be considered corrupt or profane, or even worthless, because that's more along the lines of what would be a corrupt communication would be a word that is without thought or void of meaning, or something
like
that
the
is
F-bomb.
something that is derogatory or
Like taking God's name in vain.
yeah. Well, using God's name in vain doesn't even necessarily mean including it with damn. That's not necessarily what that means.
Just careless.
It's just a careless usage of God's word or God's name. And then when you say, God, are you talking about God? Or are you talking about Elohim? Are you talking about, what version of God are you talking about? Because God in reality isn't necessarily a name. It's a describer. So, it gets way more complicated than
Yes.
you think. You can really overthink it. You really can,
Mhm.
which is what I'm good at. So,
Yes. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. You took my tangent from
Yeah,
me.
sorry.
You
go ahead.
you
Continue.
hijacked my tangent.
Continue.
I won't mention any names, but knew a gentleman that used to watch a lot of movies, and we would ask him, "Is this movie any good?" And his response most of the time is, "Oh yeah, it's really good." Was there any profanity in it? And he would stop and he'd think and he'd go, "No." How about nudity? No, I don't think so. Sex? No. So we'd rent it. And we'd take it home.
chock-a-block full.
We'd get into 5 minutes, and I said, even the credits at the beginning had sex, like
Yeah.
in foul language, and I'd take it back, and I said, dude, this is full of everything we
Yeah,
asked if
yeah.
it was there. And we'd start telling him about it, and he'd go, oh, yeah. So he had become immune,
Desensitized. Yeah.
very desensitized, to the point where he doesn't even know that it was being said.
Yeah.
And going back to the cops and the military, yeah, that's part of their
Yeah.
vocabulary.
Yeah. But
And it's not as abrasive to them as it is. GD, when I hear that, sometimes it makes me jump. It's like, oh,
yeah. I mean, I would agree that there's definitely something there. It's offensive to me. Probably just because of my upbringing. There's just something within my spirit that just gets offended by that. And I just like, and like, if I'm watching a movie and I hear, an F-bomb every once in a while, it doesn't even faze me. And I don't know if that's desensitized or because of like the crowds that I have hung around with. Like I said, I've been around enough law enforcement that I'm pretty used to that kind of language. So it doesn't really grate on me. However, the gratuitous use of foul language, it just ticks me off. Like, I'll give you a perfect example. Good Will Hunting would have been an amazing movie if it didn't have the F-bomb every third stinking word. It was just unwatchable because it just F this, F that, F this, F that,
Like,
F this, F that.
How many can
it's
we
like,
get in there?
really, I mean,
48 hours.
is that really necessary to tell the story? It's not. It doesn't add anything to the story at all. A usage of it every once in a while to make emphasis in a point or to ground you in reality, actually makes sense. Like when you are like, what was that movie with where they were in Benghazi and they were the military guys in Benghazi when Benghazi got attacked. I forget the name of the movie, but
13 something.
something I can't remember. 13 Hours, I think it's maybe. But in any case, that movie had a bit of cursing in it, but it was grounded in a reality that it made sense.
Right.
So it wasn't like it was just gratuitous. It was driven by the plot. So that even though it was cringy at some points, it actually just made sense.
I've mentioned this before. We watched the movie. It was about two mountain climbers in the snow, and there was a problem, and one of the guys ends up in this crevasse, 100,
Touching the
100
void.
feet.
Oh yeah, what's
Was
that?
it Touching the Void?
Touching the void.
Yeah, and when he's hanging there and stuck in this void, and he uses the F word multiple times. And I always thought it was funny because both Adriana and I looked over at each other and I go, we might be saying the same thing.
Yeah. I mean,
know?
if we're honest,
Yeah.
If we get into situations, and I mean, I know that even still now, like if I'm doing something and just ridiculous stuff keeps happening, it'll slip out every once in a while. I'm just like, really? What in the world is going on here?
My hands go up, my eyes go up, and I go, okay, God, you have my attention.
Yeah.
What?
So, and getting back to literature, I know that people say that, television and movies and all of that have kind of like accelerated the moral decay of the world. But guys, people who think that have not read a lot of books, because there were a lot of books that were very morally reprehensible, even going back to the 16th, 15th centuries. You know, I mean, there was some writings that were just very pornographic in nature and very foul. So that's not something that's new. It's just more visible now. It's just more people see it.
It's more pervasive.
It's more pervasive.
Advertising and marketing and mass distribution.
Yeah, for sure. But it's always been around. It's always been around. There's nothing new under the sun.
Nope.
Like you said, you know, I mean, it's just that. It's the way it is. But
Ecclesiastes.
yeah, 1984 was the last one that I read. That was an interesting read. It would, but honestly, I didn't really enjoy it all that much. I got through it because I felt like, you know, well, I need to read this. And so, because it was coming up a lot. So I read it. But I actually just didn't really enjoy it.
Yeah.
It wasn't something that I drew pleasure in reading.
Either. What about you, Greg? Do you have a most impressionable nonfiction book?
Well, I mentioned earlier, you know, doing a lot of counseling. So doing a lot of reading and online teaching videos. And I was really impacted by a book called Enough is Enough.
I scanned through that one. That was an interesting book. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a guy, David Clark, 30 years psychologist and pastor. And I guess a synopsis is he got real tired of women being told they must obey their husbands, and biblically speaking, and
Unconditionally.
Yeah, unconditionally. And you know, most people don't they don't finish that verse, which says, and husbands, you know, love your wives like Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Well, they don't go that far, and not a lot of these guys, they'll just recite that. And they're narcissistic, they're mean, they're hateful. And here's the interesting thread through that whole thing, is they're usually well-liked in church and very active in church. So when the wife comes along and says, this is happening, people, no, come on, really, Bob? He's like that? No, I can't believe that. And so my eyes were open.
I know Bob. Bob's not like that.
He's not. And then there was one lady that was living this nightmare, and she got in my face about it. Nice in my face type of thing, where she just told me like it is. And it to the point where I was angry with her for telling me I didn't have a clue what was going on. And then I read this book, and I started talking to this gentleman, trying to deal with him. And yeah, he was picture perfect out of this book. Totally changed my thought process when it came to marriage counseling, especially when women would come in and say, this is happening.
Yeah.
And so that was very enlightening. And I have handed that out to several people with a qualifier that, you know, you need to come back, talk to me, because not every man in a marriage relationship that is in trouble is like that.
Yeah.
But it was good. It was a
good book
that allowed me to change my mind.
I mean, to be honest, I only read through it. I you know, I didn't read. I scanned it basically enough to get the major points out of it. But actually, that's a good skill to pick up, speed reading.
Yes,
you should pick that up if you're doing any amount of research at all. But in any case, that's an interesting category of books. I think that's one of the areas that we have really, really gotten wrong, is literature based on marriage. There's not a lot out there, in my opinion, that is worth actually pursuing. The only one that I found that I really, really, truly believe is based on a biblical model of self-reflection and relationship with Christ is Love and Respect.
Yeah.
It's the closest one that I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that yesterday.
Yeah,
in your service.
It's a phenomenal way of looking at your marriage, and super helpful. He did an amazing job of putting that together.
Yeah.
He's a terrible presenter. He's so irritating to watch because his humor is
I love his humor.
He is so cringy. Oh my goodness. It's like I can barely get through it sometimes.
That's funny
But
that you would say that.
that being said, the material is so good. You know, it's like, now I'll tell you the one that I hate the most, the marriage book that is the worst book ever written. It's a pox upon humanity. It's 5 Love Languages. Worst book ever. It's such a terrible book. It's like 5 love languages. Okay, well, everyone has all of them, and they all change all of the time. And doing any one of those things to your partner, if it is their love language, is not going to change your marriage. It's not going to change it.
Would it help it?
Maybe not. Probably not. Probably not. Because the focus is in the wrong direction. The focus is towards the person. It's not towards Christ. So that's a big problem.
Yeah.
It's not the difference between Love and Respect and 5 Love Languages is the direction in which the material is aimed. And 5 Love Languages ultimately focuses on you doing things for your partner because their love language is X, Y, or Z. Whereas Love and Respect is I'm going to do things for my partner because I love or respect them because Christ is honored when I do that. That's to me is the hallmark of what should be biblical counseling.
I had never read that book until we started our counseling ministry here.
5 Love Languages?
Yeah. And so I picked it up and was like, okay, let's see what this is all about.
No, people swear by it.
It's definitely a feel-good marriage book. It sounds good. It feels good. But
And
it can lead to excess and abuse and dysfunction and a lot of other things
and I
if
think
taken to the extreme. Whereas Love and Respect, you can't take that to the extreme. To the extreme, you are more Christ-like.
Yeah.
Some men, especially, I think, can benefit from that because they don't know and don't focus on their wives to the point where they know what their favorite color
Perhaps.
is. What color are your wife's eyes? I don't know. When I hear that, it's like, whoa. You know, so just getting them tuned in to focusing on your wife a little bit.
That's great. You know what it doesn't do? It doesn't do anything for men. No man cares whether his wife knows that his love language is words of affirmation.
I'll agree with that.
And if they do care, it's because they're not receiving the level of respect from their wife with their words that they desire. That book is feminine in its totality.
I'll give you
It's
that.
kind of true. If you're doing Love and Respect, you don't need the love languages. If you're totally clueless about your marriage, start with 5 Love Languages, but don't end there. Keep going.
And that's only going to give you a feminine perspective as well. It's only going to deal with one aspect of it. It's not going to do anything because your wife is going to say, you know, what are your love languages? And you're going to go through that thing. You're going to go, well, you know, I guess my love languages are acts of service. You know, and I don't know. I like to have my back tickled. I like to, you know, whatever.
Well,
you know, so maybe that, you know, maybe that's it. And then she's going to do that, but she's not going to change any of her behavior as it relates to how she respects you. And it's not going to do anything for you.
It's a resource book, right?
Yeah.
It's
up there with something that Oprah would suggest.
Okay. I got a book on my nightstand that says 100 ways to make love to your wife with your clothes on.
Oh, gosh.
You know, and how cliche is that, right? But as I thumb through that, I go, ooh, that sounds like fun. You know, things to do. Everything from bringing her flowers to writing her notes to, you know, foot massages to, you know, all 100 silly little things. And I don't use it all the time, but I open it once in a while when I'm thinking, you know, she's down. I need to lift her up a little bit.
I'm going to get into a lot of trouble for this statement. Okay.
With us or
I
with
think
our audience?
the concept of flowers, candy, and all of those things that kind of are perceived as romantic, they eliminate 90% of what men actually do to show affection to their wives. What men actually do to show affection to their wives is typically something akin to providing for them. Like just this last weekend, I didn't feel well, but I hung a barn door for my wife. Now, I didn't do that for me. I don't even like the barn door. I don't even care for it, but I know she wanted it. And so my showing to her that I actually care about her and love her was to put that barn door up. That's not a romantic thing.
Is it an act of service?
Well, it could be
one of the love languages.
It could be, but if you ask my wife what her love language is, she'll tell you all of them.
Yeah. Well, it is.
Yeah,
it should be.
And
well, if it's
but
an act
yeah.
of sacrifice,
but that's
is
what
the hallmark of an expression of
that's
love.
what it speaks to, right? It's not that. Well, I brought her flowers today. Well, that's great. Flowers die, they rot. They're pretty for an occasion, and it's the thought that counts, right? Well, how do men typically express those thoughts? Would we be better served by taking men and making them do things that are not natural to them, or helping women to understand the things that they do naturally to demonstrate their love to their wife, which is what Love and Respect does?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Does that better than any other book that I've ever read. And it does more. Here's the interesting thing. Love and Respect does more for men than it does for women. And the reason it is like that is because it's the only book that I have ever read that actually speaks to the heart of a man.
Mm-hmm.
The only one.
True. Yep.
The only one I've ever read.
But
and that's the reason why a lot of women reject it, by the way.
True. Yeah, and they reject it. A lot of women that I've talked to, for the same reason as you reject it, is they don't like Emerson's humor or his presentation.
I think that's an excuse.
I do
if they
too.
really picked up on the information, they could
Yes.
get through that. I think that's an excuse that they utilized because they do not like the material and they feel like they will never be able to respect their husband for X, Y, or Z reason.
Yeah.
And that might be well deserved,
there's a
actually.
tangent we could go off.
That might be well deserved, actually.
Yeah.
That's a fair statement.
Yeah.
They may not deserve your respect, but that's the whole thing about love and respect. It's not whether they deserve it or not. It's because Christ expects it.
I still like to bring my wife flowers once in a while.
I very rarely bring Kim flowers. There's probably something I need to work on. I'm not very good at sentiment at all. Everybody knows this. This is not something that is a mystery to anyone.
Well, when you speak it from the pulpit, yeah, everybody knows, Chris.
Well, I think it's.
But
I
we
think
love
it's.
you.
I think it's important that people are honest with who they are. How do you expect to change if you're not honest with who you are? So, I know that there's things that I have in my life that I need to change, and sentiment is one of those. I'm not very good at it. It doesn't occur to me because I don't need it. I don't need people telling me that they care about me or that they appreciate me or any of that kind of stuff. None of that speaks to me. I appreciate it, and I think it's nice and it's lovely, and I like being a part of it, especially if it makes them feel good. But I don't really necessarily need it, so I don't think about it, right? So it is something that I do definitely need to work on.
Yeah, it's a good thing you know.
But
we
ask
did
my
this
wife
podcast after Pastor Appreciation.
Well, yeah,
Month.
but ask my wife if I love her. Ask my wife if she knows that I love her, right?
Yeah.
There's things that I do that are not flowers. There's things that I do that are not candy.
Sure.
There's things that I do that are not cards that demonstrate to her that I love her.
Mm-hmm.
Like this morning, I walked out of the house and I made her coffee before I left the house, right? It's a simple thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's no flowers, there's no candy, there's nothing. But it's something that I can do to demonstrate to her that I'm willing to sacrifice some of my time because I care about you.
She appreciates it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fiddler on the Roof.
Mm-hmm. And so, man, I think that a lot of that stuff is overrated. I think that there's a lot of marriages that fail where guys do that a lot. And I also think that a lot of that has been promulgated by commercial industry to compel you to buy cards, candy, and flowers.
Absolutely.
Diamonds, even.
Mm.
Do you know
That's
before
a big one.
before the diamond industry was created, diamonds were useless. They were they had no value.
Mm-hmm.
And then after the diamond industry found them and put a value on them, that's when they become valuable. It's the diamond industry that sets the standard for diamonds.
I'm not into diamonds. Nah.
You know what the thing about them is that they get lost.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Little bitty tiny things, and they're very expensive.
They're just things, right?
Yeah.
And none of that matters, right? All that matters is that you're living, loving, and serving one another. That's what really matters. And service to each person is different. And that's one thing that love and respect demonstrates. And that book is, I probably should have put that up there with some of the books that has been more influential to me, nonfiction books, than most others.
Mm-hmm.
That book is pretty incredible.
And it's not perfect.
Oh no, not by any stretch.
It's ahead of the pack.
But it is ahead of its time, or late to the game. One of those,
Mm-hmm.
maybe both.
Maybe both, yeah.
Yeah.
Ahead of its time and late to the game.
Yep.
Well, that just makes it pertinent for today.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So yeah, love and respect. But I'm going to say no to 5 love languages. What's your most disliked book, Ken?
Most disliked book.
Oh, my.
Well, that's a good one.
That's a...
I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
We'll close it with this because we want to end it on a good positive note. What's your most disliked book?
Can you think of yours, Greg? While I think of mine.
I what I'm thinking is, well, I probably haven't read it yet. Whatever it is.
Interesting.
I usually check out books I'm going to read in advance. I usually have some sense that I'm going to have something to gain by investing my time in reading it. So I don't often grab one randomly.
Or even stuff that I've read in the past and gone, finished it and went, that sucked. It's probably not even in my mind anymore. Because I have read some books over the years that I get to the end and it was like, all right.
Well, I can tell you probably the one that I hated the worst. Didn't even finish it. Went into it with expectations, expected to learn something. Didn't even finish it. And it was just like, my life will be ruined if I finish reading this. The Quran.
Oh,
yeah.
I thought you were going to say 5 love languages.
Yeah, it's just such a twisted, demented, demonic.
Yeah.
I just couldn't digest it.
I haven't read the entire Quran. I've read excerpts of it.
Yeah.
But that's not something that I would read cover to cover. I've got too much other good material to read.
Mm-hmm.
I've read other, literature. I've read the catechisms. I've read lots of Buddhist writings. I've read lots of Zen writings or Taoist writings. I've read the Satanic Bible. I've read lots of stuff, but I've never fully digested the Quran. Just
You're not missing anything.
yeah.
Yeah.
What about? Go ahead, Gary.
I was just going to say, a book that just popped into my head that I absolutely loved and have suggested to many, many people is The Bridge at Andau. James Michener, and he was actually there helping get Hungarian people across the border into Austria across this bridge. And the bridge is a footbridge. It's not anything big, and most of the people went off across in the swamp and everything. But it's about the Russians coming in and occupying Hungary. And, of course, my wife being Hungarian, that's part of her heritage, and she lived it. She was there when this was taking place. And so it really hits home. But it was so well written. And he's the type of writer for me that I'm there. I'm in the water. I'm in the freezing water. I'm in the reeds. I'm in the mud. I hear the Russians, behind me. I hear their guns cocking, and so his writing is very, very graphic to me. And so I really enjoyed that. And I
That's
have
cool.
not had anybody say, you know, why did you tell me that book sucked?
Yeah.
Everybody's come back, that was really good. So the Bridget Andau.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, I've never read it, but sounds interesting.
There's a few other authors that we haven't mentioned that I think are worth mentioning. What about C.S. Lewis?
Of course.
Yeah.
Lewis fans?
Goes without
I
saying.
mean, I wasn't. I read Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, but I didn't really enjoy it. I wasn't a big fan of his writing. I did. His world to me was too. I don't know what the word I'm looking for is. It wasn't as gritty as I like worlds to be.
Mhm.
It was too animated, maybe cartoony. I just didn't like his style. As a contemporary of Tolkien, you know, I mean, I would prefer Tolkien over
Mhm.
C.S.
Mhm.
Lewis.
Well, what about works like Mere Christianity?
His nonfiction.
Yeah.
I mean, his nonfiction work is good. And I liked. He wrote Screw Tape Letters too, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. So Screw Tape
Yeah.
Letters was good. I
Abolition
liked any of
Man.
his work that was not like in the fantasy genre. I wasn't a big
Yeah.
fan of like the allegory that
Mhm.
he purposely placed into some of his. You know, I think
Yeah.
Tolkien did a better job of putting allegory into his, even though he insisted that he didn't.
Yeah.
You know,
Whereas Lewis did.
Whereas Lewis did, but it just didn't really resonate with me. But some people really, you know, C.S. Lewis really resonates with him, but it just
Yeah.
didn't.
What about A.W. Tozer?
And Tozer's good.
I read almost everything I get my hands on about Tozer.
Yeah, Tozer's good.
Yeah.
He'll
I don't-
he'll make you think
Yeah.
hard.
He's kind of like Spurgeon in that you kind of have to get used to reading him.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, you have to get a hold of his tone.
Or
and his
Oswald
style.
Chambers. Oswald Chambers is another one
Mhm.
that you kind of have to get used to reading. You have to almost remap your brain to kind of understand what they're saying.
Yeah. Those are the books where I read a sentence and go, okay, let's try it again. And
And again,
no, and
And
again, you know.
Mhm. Yep.
And well, maybe I'll just read on, and that'll explain what I just read. So a little bit too
Yeah,
too lofty for me.
I'm convinced some of those writers, you just have to keep reading them so that your brain begins to remap itself to like understand.
the
You know,
concepts.
it's like,
that
oh,
they're
okay, this
trying-
is how this writing works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah, you're probably right. Yeah.
There's some other ones.
Probably, and I brought this other one with me. This is one of the books that probably best helped me come over my objections to Christianity in my early years, and one that I've given consistently to friends over the years who've struggled with the same issue, which is Disappointment with God by Philip Yancey. And he's just a really good author, and the way he goes through this book, he basically has this conversation with a guy whose young daughter dies of a fatal disease and cannot reconcile that with who God is. And that's the argument that a lot of atheists and agnostics have, is how can there be a loving God if he allows evil in the world
Yeah.
and these things to happen to innocent people? So I want to read a little section in here to kind of give you a feel for it. He's talking about he's going to Bible college, and at this time, he basically doesn't even believe in God, but he's in this Bible college. I was also required to attend weekly prayer meetings with 4 other students involved in university work. Those meetings followed a consistent pattern. Joe would pray, and then Craig, and Chris, and the other Joe, and then all 4 would pause politely for about 10 seconds. I never prayed, and after the brief silence, we would open our eyes and return to our rooms. But one February night, to everyone's surprise, including my own, I did pray. I have no idea why. I had not planned to. But after Joe and Craig and Chris and Joe had finished, I found myself praying aloud. God, I said, and I could sense the tension level in the room rise. As I recall it, I said something like this: God, here we are, supposed to be concerned about those 10,000 students at the University of South Carolina who are going to hell. Well, you know that I don't care if they all go to hell, if there is one. I don't even care if I go there. You would have to attend a Bible college to appreciate how these words must have sounded to the others in the room. I may as well have been invoking witchcraft or offering child sacrifices, but no one stirred or tried to stop me. and I continued praying. For some reason, I started talking about the parable of the Good Samaritan. We Bible college types were supposed to feel the same concern for university students as the Samaritan felt for the bloodied Jew lying in the ditch. But I felt no such concern. I said, I felt nothing for them. And then it happened. In the middle of my prayer, just as I was describing how little I cared for our assigned targets of compassion, I saw that story in a new light. I had been visualizing the scene as I spoke, an old-fashioned looking Samaritan dressed in robes and a turban, bending over a dirty, blood-crusted form in a ditch. But suddenly, in the internal screen of my brain, those two figures changed. The kindly Samaritan took on the face of Jesus. The Jew, pitiable victim of a highway robbery, took on another face too, a face I recognized with a start as my own. In a flash, I saw Jesus reaching down with a moistened rag to clean my wounds and staunch the flow of blood. And as he bent over, I saw myself, the wounded robbery victim, open my eyes and purse my lips. Then, as if watching in slow motion, I saw myself spit at him, full in the face. I saw all that. I, who did not even believe in visions or in biblical parables or even in Jesus. It stunned me. Abruptly, I stopped praying, got up, and left that room. All that evening, I thought about what had happened. It wasn't exactly a vision, more like a daydreamed parable with a moral twist. Still, I couldn't put it behind me. What did it mean? Was it genuine? I wasn't sure, but I knew that my cockiness had been shattered. On that campus, I had always found security in my agnosticism. No longer. I had caught a new glimpse of myself. Perhaps in all my self-assured and mocking skepticism, I was the neediest one of all. I wrote a brief note to my fiancée that night, saying guardedly, I want to wait a few days before talking about it, but I may have just had the first authentic religious experience of my life.
Wow. That gave me chills.
Yeah, that's great. I love that.
Yeah.
Give us the name of the book again.
It's Disappointment with God by Philip Yancey.
Okay.
Oh, that was good.
A few of those will be checked out or bought.
Yeah,
that was
good.
That was amazing writing.
Yeah.
Pretty
Yeah,
good.
Good.
Excellent.
Just as we end, The Case for Christ is another one that I enjoy.
Strobel, right?
Lee Strobel. Yeah, he was an investigative reporter for, I believe, the New York Times. And his wife got saved, and he set out to say, I'm going to show her how wrong this is and disprove the fact of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And ends up now as one of our greatest apologists.
Yeah. Some of that evidence that he presents in that is pretty amazing. All right. Well, that about does it for us today. As always, thank you for joining us. If you have a comment or a question for an idea for an episode, send us an email to 3p@ethelbaptistchurch.org. Got good news. If it gets used, you could be the proud recipient of the now world-famous 3P coffee mug. It will improve all of your coffee and make you super, super cool as well. If you enjoyed this episode, please give it a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Thanks again to Ethel Baptist Church and its members for the generous support of this ministry. And again, thank you for listening. And until next time, remember the Great Commission. Go into all the world, reach the lost with the gospel, and build disciples who can do the same. And with that, we are out.